Welcome back to another episode of The Offensive Line. We hope you were encouraged by last week's episode on staying vigilant. Even though it was an atypical episode, it does actually relate to our theme this season with staying wary. That's why we've been covering these Christian sayings and practices and examining them to see if they're biblical or not. Because people say and do things all the time for no other reason than just by thoughtlessly emulating someone else. Christians say and do things sometimes by adopting non-Christian sayings without giving them much thought. And that's especially the case with the one today, which is meet them where they're at.
Wow. Now, the idea of meeting people where they're at can be a good one, especially when it comes to counseling situations. When you have a friend or a family member who is going through a rough time, you want to meet them where they're at, if that means you want to show empathy and commiseration. Romans 12:15 says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep." So if meeting people where they're at means being there for people, intentionally listening to them share about what they're struggling through, go for it.
At the end of chapter 2 in the book of Job, Job's 3 friends come from some distance away, all from different locations, to come and sit with Job in silence for an entire week. And this was a good move on their part, but it was the only good move. Because for the rest of the time they speak, they make assumptions left and right about Job and about God. They talk past him, and they ultimately show that they know nothing about how to be a good friend to a hurting Job.
They started off well by meeting him where he was at, but then things went badly when they stopped doing that after opening up their mouths to speak at him and not with him. Meeting people where they're at can mean leaving a place of pride and arrogance and speaking with great humility. In that sense, it is certainly biblical. But that's not all it means. That's not how a lot of people use the phrase. Maybe it is taken to mean you want to humble yourself and lower yourself from a lofty position where you act as if you know everything.
But how this phrase is often used is not just to lower your attitude, but to lower your standards. This happens all the time. As a Christian, you want to be a good witness to some friends of yours that indulge in certain activities that Christians probably shouldn't be doing, such as watching graphic TV shows or going to bars. Some Christians you might know engage in vulgar language and take the Lord's name in vain because most of their friends do it. That's not at all what Paul means when he says in 1 Corinthians 9 that he became all things to all men.
Or what Jesus meant when he said to be in the world. Why? Because he also says in that very same command to be in the world, but not of the world. Basically, be in the world by living in an evil and corrupt generation, but don't be of the world by looking like them or doing the same things as them. Don't lower your standards or excuse people of sinful behavior. Rather, the Christian should challenge sin and be an example of godly behavior.
There's also another way Christians use this phrase, which is not just with individual people, but when it comes to church. Many churches try to meet people where they're at, all for the purpose of getting people to come, because churches want to be relevant and appealing to those outside the church. But churches aren't called to be relevant. They aren't called to be relatable. Let's look at what churches are supposed to look like.
In 1 Timothy 3, Paul is writing to Timothy, who is at the church in Ephesus. He writes that he intends to go in person, but just in case he is delayed, the letter of 1 Timothy should serve as instruction of what the church is to be. In verse 15, he says that the church is the household of God, the church of the living God, the pillar and support of the truth. He says later that the church has a common confession, which is about the mystery of godliness. He who was revealed in the flesh was vindicated in the spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up in glory. The church has a shared confession that is Jesus Christ. That's the purpose of the church. It isn't to relate to the world, but it's to be a light in the world.
We hope you enjoyed this video on another Christian cliche. The whole point of this season is not to give you a list of things not to say, but it's to help you guys grow in discernment, so you guys can realize a lot of these things for yourself. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts and stay tuned for next week for another exciting video. This is The Offensive Line, and we're uncomplicating the complicated. See you next week.